Hi students, and welcome to week 7, Exercise Science 230 Motor Learning Control. And this week we're just doing a couple of short online lectures, and this first video is only going to go for a few minutes, and it's just going to try to connect last week's last week's lecture with this week's content. So for those that don't know, my name's Anthony Whitty and I sort of teach motor learning control down here in Melbourne at ACU and been doing so for 5 or 6 years here now. But just to give you an idea, is last week we saw the last first sort of 5 weeks we focused mainly on those areas of called motor control. And last week at the end of the lecture, and you start off during the middles talking about the difference between learning and performance. And then we started talking about a thing called transfer of learning. So what we really did last week is we started for the first time to try to teach you guys the difference between performance and learning and how you can actually find ways to actually assess someone's learning. Now, we can't actually assess learning per se, we can only actually assess it from what we call a relatively permanent change in performance. And that's where we come at those things called retention and transfer tests, which you would have heard last week. Well, now we're going to look at the next sort of 4 or 5 weeks is how you construct what we call an optimal learning environment. So how, as we as skill acquisitionists, how do we design training sessions and blocks of training and the way we do things? What kind of structure do we put in and what theory do we use in order to, put that structure together? And the first thing we need to do is we need to understand our learners as best as we possibly can so we can apply the best structure or the best sort of environment for those people to actually learn in. So you started last week and you actually looked at what we call transfer of learning. So you looked at what has the person done in the past that might have a positive or a negative transfer on the skill that you're trying to teach them now. So for an example, if someone's a soccer player and you try to teach them to maybe kick a rugby league ball, in theory there could be a positive transfer because the actions are quite similar. But if you were trying to teach someone how to play tennis when they've already played squash for a long period of time, then there could be some negative transfer because one is a very risky sport, another one is a completely different style of movement. So they normally have to sort of unlearn that material before they learn the new skill. So it just gives an example where we're going for. So now, this video and the next one coming up, the first thing we look at after we look at sort of what they've done in the past, whether it influence in a positive or negative way, is we start to look at what are the people's motivation for learning this particular skill and what are their preferred or what are the different learning styles that they might adhere to. So we're going to just go through, a short video on understanding some learning styles, understand how to construct that optimal learning environment and how to just look at motivation as well. Now keep in mind as well, we make it really clear when it comes to things like motivation, you would have been taught a lot of that information in your psychology unit. So whether it's Exercise Science 199 or Exercise Science 296, and whether it be from John Marnie in Queensland and his team, or Elise Wilcox in Melbourne and her team, or Michael Notel in Sydney and their team, they're really the experts on those motivational aspects. We don't want to sort of, teach you anything different than what they are. So we're just introducing that concept of motivation directly to skill acquisition, but not to say that we're necessarily the experts on motivation. That is definitely really residing with the psych group, but it is connected directly to what we're doing now. So we sort of try to make sure we connect those learnings with what we're doing now as well. And finally too, this information we're giving you last week and now for the next 4 or 5 weeks directly links to your last assignment. Now I know you're not looking at that yet because you've got your mid-semester exam, you've got your motor control report in week 9, then in week 13 you've got what's called your skill training project. And so a lot of the information that we're giving you now is directly related to that assignment. So although you're not going to be looking at the assignment now, this is the platform to go back to if you're trying to start your assignment in that third assessment task when the time comes. So last week we looked at how to measure performance. This week we look at the learning styles and motivation. And then from here on in we look at things like demonstration, verbal instructions, which we'll do in this week's lab. We look at feedback, we look at part and whole practice, and we look at how to actually design your actual training programs. So really we set you up now for that last assessment piece, which is due in week 13. So hopefully you'll see the link between the content leading up until last week. Last week, a little bit of a transition from motor control to sort of what we call motor learning, and now we're really sort of swinging into that sort of motor learning learning, skill acquisition side of things, almost teaching you how to be the best coach, facilitator, therapist, whatever it might be. So like I said, that's the first video, part 1 for this week, and part 2 will be up next, and that will be dealing directly with a 10 slide sort of lecture, really only going for about sort of 10 to 12 minutes, just to talk about learning styles and motivation. Okay, thanks guys.